Hello and welcome to this, excuse me, oh, little frog in my throat there. Hello and welcome to this online video lecture about electrochemical cells. By the end of this lecture, you should be able to explain how electrochemical cells work, including identifying the parts of an electrochemical cell and the oxidation-reduction reaction that's happening within the electrochemical cell. So most of what we actually nowadays call batteries are actually a type of a chemical reaction that's kind of separated called an electrochemical cell. And the very first electrochemical cells that were ever made when people first started learning about this stuff were pretty darn simple, and they're simple enough that we could actually recreate them in our lab at school if we wanted to. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through one of these simple types of cells. I'm going to tell you what all the parts are called, explain to you what causes the electrons to flow through the circuits that you put the cell into, and that should be good. We should be all set after that. So, all right. I think the very first thing I'm going to do is actually bring in a picture of a cell. So let me just grab that really fast and bring it up here. And I'm going to have to change the size of it. So I got my electrochemical cell, but it's a big cell. There we go. That's better. Okay, I'm going to put it right in the middle. Perfect. So electrochemical cell basically has two half reactions that are somewhat physically separated. Usually the only thing connecting them is some kind of a semi-permeable membrane or something called a salt bridge, and we'll get to that in just a second. So what happens is electrons are generated in one half of the electrochemical cell, and then when the cell is attached to a circuit, they'll flow through the circuit. The electrons will flow through the wire of the circuit, doing any work along the way that they encounter, like lighting a light or making a sound or something. And then they arrive at the other end of the circuit where they react chemically and finish the oxidation-reduction reaction. And that's the kind of the overview of how an electrochemical cell works. So let's start off with identifying some of the parts that we see here. So let's just get some chemistry going. See this gray metal bar right here? We'll say that that's zinc. And so these bars of metal in these cells are called electrodes. So this is the zinc electrode. That's an important term, electrode. And the blue solution that it's in has to match the electrode. So since this is a zinc electrode, it has to be some zinc salt solution. And for this explanation, and classically usually when you see these, they're usually sulfate solutions. So we're going to say that this blue solution that the zinc electrode in is zinc sulfate. Okay. And so on the other side, you can probably tell, excuse me, I don't know why my throat is so hoarse right now, but on the other side, you got this reddish metal bar, so that's copper. So that's the copper electrode. And then again, the solution that it's in has to match the metal, so this is going to be copper sulfate. It's probably copper 2 sulfate. Now, it's a word that gets kind of used and abused quite often, but these solutions in these electrochemical cells are often called electrolytes, which I am hoping that I spelled it correctly, so electrolytes. Okay, so what's going on here? What's the deal? Why are these electrons moving? Well, let's break this down a little bit. This is actually an oxidation-reduction reaction. And so what happens is the zinc electrode is made of zinc atoms. And I'm actually going to zoom in on this half right here. Bloop. All right. That's a little too big. Okay, there we go. So we have zinc actual atoms that are making up this electrode right here. And what will happen is they're going to jump off of this metal bar and they're going to become zinc ions, zinc 2 plus ions. When they do that, in order to become 2 plus ions, the zinc has to get rid of electrons, 2 electrons. And so the electrons are now freed up within the electrode, and they're freed up in such a way that they can move, they can flow. So if they have some place to go, they can now go there. And of course, the zinc sulfate solution just consists of these zinc 2 plus ions and the sulfate, SO4, 2 minus ions. That's what's floating around in here. So basically what's happening is the zinc atoms of the zinc electrode are ionizing and becoming zinc ions in the solution, and in order for that to happen, they have to release 2 electrons, which then are freed up inside of the electrode and can move if they have some place to go. So do they have some place to go? Well, that depends on what's happening over here on the other side. So on the other side, as you could probably guess, almost the exact opposite thing is happening. Since this is copper sulfate solution, you have 2 plus copper ions floating around in the solution, along with, again, sulfate ions. And what happens over here is that these copper solutions, when they bump into electrons, on the surface of the electrode, they become copper atoms. So that gives the electrons, in essence, some place to go. So it gives the electrons that are made over here, where the zinc electrode is at, some place to go. So now let me zoom back out here again to full 100% view here. Perfect. So essentially what happens, let me grab a color, let's see, this pinky color. Basically what happens is the electrons that are produced over here in this half of the cell, if this half of the cell is connected with a conducting material to this half of the cell, that gives the electrons a path. And so the electrons will flow through that wire down here, where then they can react with the copper ions to form the copper metal on the copper electrode. So these arrows up here, these are showing the electron flow up here. It's showing how the electrons can flow. And that's what you want. That's the whole purpose of having an electrochemical cell. You want to generate this electron flow, which is also called current. It generates the current that runs our electrical devices. For example, if there was a light bulb right here, right? A little light bulb, as the electrons flowed through that, it would cause the light bulb to light. Or if there's a speaker, it would cause it to buzz or whatever. And so that's the basic idea. You've got one half of the electrochemical cell generating free electrons, and then the other half gives the free electrons some place to go. And so that causes them to flow from one half of the cell to the other. Now, a few more details. This thing in the middle, you might be wondering what that is. That's called a salt bridge. Because what will happen, oops, bridge, BR. There, like Mackinac Bridge. Perfect. Okay. So what happens is eventually the zinc ions on this side, right, and the sulfate ions on this side can become unbalanced, and that can make the reaction become unfavorable. And so the salt bridge gives these ions an opportunity to flow from one half of the cell to the other. That's why there's 2 arrows here. The sulfate anions will go over to the other side to keep it balanced, and the zinc ones can go to the other side to keep those balanced. And then that keeps the reaction with the electrons favorable on both sides, and it keeps the reaction occurring longer so that the electrons will flow longer. If you don't have a salt bridge in here, you'll get current at first, but it'll quickly stop, even though there's plenty of electrons left in the zinc electrode that can flow over to the copper one. So that's what that's all about. Now, 2 more terms that you will need to know in order to do okay on this quiz and understand batteries a little bit better, because you'll see them all over the place. You'll notice that there is a let's see. Okay. So you notice there's a negative sign right there, and there's a positive sign right there, and you see these on batteries all the time, and they're associated with 2 terms. The negative half of the cell is where the electrons are being produced or freed, and that's called the anode. So the negative half of the cell is called the anode, and the positive half of the cell is the part of the cell that the electrons are flowing to, and that's called the cathode. Right? And hopefully you have realized this by now, but because this is part of the oxidation-reduction reaction, this is a redox reaction. And so you need to be able to identify which part of the cell is the oxidation part and which part is the reduction part. So I like Leo says Gur, you might like oil rig, but remember that the loss of electrons is oxidation. So when these zinc atoms lose their electrons and they become freed up to flow through the circuit, that's oxidation. So the anode half is the oxidation half. And then over here, where the copper ions are gaining the electrons, and so that's the reduction half. Perfect. So the anode is oxidation, the cathode is reduction, and I found on the internet kind of a cute little picture that can help you to remember that. And let's see, here it is. So you've got, now don't get confused. This picture, this is hand drawn by some science teacher out there somewhere. And it's flipped from the picture I just labeled in the lecture, so don't let that confuse you. You'll notice the electron flow is going the opposite way. But anox for the oxidation, anode is oxidation, so anox and red cat will help you to remember the two halves of an electrochemical cell. So anox and red cat is a way that you can remember that. So that about does it for our lecture on electrochemical cells. Thank you for watching, and as always, if you have any questions, feel free to ask in class.